Boa tarde a todos e boa tarde a todas. Lamento este pequeno compasso de espera, que não é assim.
Yeah, just a couple of minutes.
Okay, so unfortunately, Professor Paiva got a flu, and he apologized that he couldn't come. So I'm pleased to present Professor Corbellini, and the presentation I will read was written by Professor Paiva, as you could understand, as it is really accurate. And so, dear Professor Sabrina Corbellini, dear colleagues, dear students, good afternoon everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to the second conference of the third year of the annual research seminar of the Center for History of Society and Culture, the Worlds of History, New Perspectives and Debates. For those of you who attend this seminar for the first time, I would like to start by briefly recalling that the purpose of it is to invite distinguished scholars from different fields of history, originating from various parts of the world, and working on distinct chronologies, from medieval to modern history, to deliver conferences that help us to foster new ways of thinking about how to do history, not only in Portugal, but also on larger spatial scales. We want to challenge especially the young generations to dialogue with some of the most prestigious and innovative historians to discuss their cutting-edge research, their knowledge, their methodologies, the problems they address. This seminar has the support of several institutions, besides the Center for History of Society and Culture. I should thank all of them. My sincere acknowledgements include the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at the University of Coimbra and its Dean, Professor Albano Figueiredo, and the Department of History, European Studies, Archaeology and Arts, and its Director, Professor Pedro Carvalho. And finally, Professor Cristina Freitas, Director of the Archive of the University of Coimbra, that hosts us today. It is now my pleasure and privilege to introduce our guest speaker. Sabrina Corbellini is currently Professor of History of Reading in Pre-Modern Europe at the Department of Medieval History of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities of the University of Groningen in Netherlands, where she is also Rosalind Franklin Fellow since 2008. Rosalind Franklin Fellowship, for those who don't know, is a program primarily directed at ambitious women in academia, designed to support women's careers towards full professorship in a European top research university. Previously, she held positions at Leiden University and after at the University of Amsterdam, where she was lecturer in medieval and early modern history before she moved to Groningen. Her early studies at the world's oldest university, Bologna in Italy, provided her with a significant background in philology and Germanic studies. Later, she moved to Leiden, a university very well known since the 17th century, particularly for the atmosphere of intellectual freedom enjoyed by scholars. There, she earned her PhD in 2000 with a dissertation originally in Dutch, titled Italian Virtues and Vices, Dirk Potter's Flowers of Virtue, and D'Italian Fiori di Virtù. She has extensive experience in presenting and coordinating international research projects, all of them highly stimulating, using interdisciplinary approaches that connect history, literature, and philology. I'll mention just a few. Between 2008 and 2012, she was the PI of a ERC starting grant to research about Holy Read and Lay Readers, a social history of vernacular Bible translations in the Middle Ages. In this very important project, she argued that during the European late Middle Ages, before Luther, Europe was the scenario of a cultural revolution that blurred the dichotomy between religious and lay, and also between Latin and vernacular. This created, and I quote her, a more diffuse situation and led to lay emancipation characterized by a dramatic increase in the production of vernacular religious texts and, more specifically, by the production and distribution of vernacular Bibles. Going back to the project she directed between 2013 and 2017, she integrated a cost action about new communities of interpretation. Between 2015 and 2019, the Dutch Research Council funded her competitive cities of readers, religious literacies in the long 15th century, and between 2019 and 2022, the same Dutch Council supports her research titled In Readers and Early Modern Dutch Bibles and Their Readers. A final reference to an ongoing era project titled Public Renaissance, Urban Cultures of Public Space between early modern Europe and present, where she and her team explore how the past is inscribed in the material culture of the public space we still inhabit, and how this contributes to shaping actions and events in the present. A very important project to demonstrate the social relevance of history in present-day societies. The outputs of this project assumed different forms. I just mentioned a few books and articles published during the last decade. In 2013, Sabrina Corbellini edited From Rappels, Instructing the Soul, Feeding the Spirit, and Accompanying the Passion, Cultures of Religious Reading in the Late Middle Ages. In 2015, for Brill, together with Margaret Ucliffe and Bart Rummakers, she edited Discovering the Riches, Religious Reading in Late Medieval and Early Modern Europe. In 2019, in collaboration with Angelo Cataneo, she edited the Global High, Dutch, Spanish and Portuguese maps in the collection of the Grand Duke Cosimo III de' Medici. Her most recent article was published this year at the prestigious journal Urban History under the title Indoor Public Space and the Mobility of Religious Knowledge in Late Medieval Deventer and Amiens. These research projects, along with the books, book chapters and articles she authored, established her as a highly important historian in fields such as the history of religious reading, book culture, the circulation of biblical texts in vernacular language, and medieval and modern education. Her contributions have been particularly significant in advancing a holistic understanding of written culture spanning from the medieval period to dawn of the early modern age. I also highlight how she has demonstrated that this written culture did not create deep divisions between the Catholic and Reformed worlds. In line with the confessionalization thesis proposed by Wolfgang Reinhardt. back in the last decades of the 20th century. Professor Sabrina Corbellini, we are delighted for having you here with us. Now I think I can use my own words. We are looking forward to hear from you.
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
So,
And take your time. I will.
thank you very much for this very much too kind introduction. You're raising the bar exponentially. So I'll try not to disappoint you too much. But as I said, thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here and also to share with you my research ideas. And what I try to do to share with you my sources, also the methodological and theoretical background that I've been using, and I'm really very much look forward to discussing with you some of the topics which were already so kindly introduced in this presentation. So let's get started. Before really going to the topic of my lecture, I would like to share with you a little bit of the background. How did I actually come to this idea of studying religious reading, which, as you have heard, has been my research topic until my university started rent in 2008. And why combining these geographies, I would say, the spatial approaches to religious reading? Why does it matter? And what does it bring to me, my research, and what could potentially bring to all of you while you're performing your research? So a little bit of the background where I come from and the ideas that I used in order to create this connection between spatial studies and the history of reading. First, I would say knowledge or framework of interpretation I would like to share with you. As I said, not my work, but something that I read and really inspired me very much is this concept of lieu de savoir, which, as you can see on the screen, has been developed in France by Christian Jacob. Actually is an ancient historian. And he's been working a lot since let's say 2014, even more before that, on a series of books with this title, lieu de savoir, translated to English into sites of knowledge. You can see, this is actually a short extract from the only English article written by him, which is being published quite recently in 2017, about lieu de savoir, places and spaces in the history of knowledge. Which I don't know if you know this article, I would very much recommend, because besides describing this concept that can be used, it also, in my view, it gives a very good, let's say, background of how you could use your spatial and social frameworks and time and space in order to better understand the transmission of knowledge. And what he tries to do is not specific, it's a kind of a very broad chronological framework he's creating, and I found it very, very inspiring to connect, let's say, the places with the transmission of knowledge. What I also found very, let's say, very inspiring in Christian Jacob's work is his definition of knowledge, which I also put on the screen, which is very much the idea of combining, let's say, contents with societal approaches, but also very much to the whole mental, linguistic, technical, and social processes. So it's also very much, let's say, situated knowledge, so specialized knowledge, but also knowledge which only can develop through interaction with objects, for example. So in his book, you find a chapter about the study room and how it's been evolving, about the use of tables and the use of pencil, or all kinds of objects that can potentially help us to better understand how this this site of knowledge have been changing. And together, name is already been mentioned, Margriet Opfried, and I would like to restate that I've been working with her for a very long time. So many of the things I'm presenting today are things that will also be created together with her. So I think she also deserves the merits in this presentation. And we try to reflect on this savoir and the usability of this concept in this online publication under the Foucauldian, which is done a couple of years ago. A second, let's say, framework I would like to share before, let's say, going into the topic is where this term geographies of reading, so what I've used for my title comes from, actually is based on this article by David Livingstone. David Livingstone is one of the most famous British geographers. And in recent time, he has very much developed for, let's say, study of geography, so very much to the study of combining geography and, let's say, the evolution of science and text. And he wrote this article, which has been of seminal importance for my research in this transaction with British geographers, in which he somehow explains also very much the methodological and theoretical background in order to construct these geographies of reading and explain how the spatial, let's say, topics and spatial lines have been present for a very long time in the study of the transmission of knowledge, books, in a very, very broad sense, and how this can also be used in also to better understand how this knowledge is transformed and disseminated. The last preliminary reference is to it's a very different book, is the Cambridge History of Science, also 2006, and if you happen to have a look at the volume on early modern science, you will see that the Cambridge History of Science really organizes the description of, let's say, scientific knowledge according to very specific spaces and places. So you won't find names, and very much the household, the pharmacy, the university, so very much along the lines that also be used. What, in my view, hasn't happened yet, as seldom happened, to apply these old geographies of reading, these old spatial approaches to the study of the Middle Ages, and even more specifically to the study of, let's say, religious reading. So that's what I've been trying to do in my research, and this is what I want to share with you today. So another important point before I start sharing with you some of my sources is that I think it's very important to consider reading, of course, as an individual activity, but above all as a communal activity. That can be performed in spaces and places where people get together and exchange information and experiences. I think this group, let's say, communal aspect is very important to study transmission of knowledge altogether, but particularly in my case to study text and reading. So along this line, the focus in my paper will be directed to the interaction occurring within these places and spaces, these geographies, with the readers involved in the act of reading. Of course, I mean, in my overview, there are some spaces that you will expect, and maybe I will also, and I hope so, also surprise you by sharing with you spaces which are not often connected to the history of reading. As a matter of fact, I'm convinced that it is particularly important to focus on non-conventional places of knowledge where transfer is taking place. Only by addressing the informal, the domestic, the private, the unofficial, we were able to sketch a satisfactory picture of pre-modern and also modern society. So there has been a lot of research being done in books and libraries, but I would say, less often outside the traditional spaces. So very much the ducal library, royal library, we know a lot about it. We know less about this, let's say, the domestic space of the professional space. So there's also what I would like to focus on. So what I refer to as geographies of reading is research on reading activities, strategies, and techniques in a spatial framework. And I'm convinced that when put in a historical perspective, such geographies of reading allow us to investigate how through books knowledge was produced and disseminated with the aim of reconstructing its availability and testing the impact of the circulation of knowledge on societal transformation. So, very much in line with my slightly enigmatic title of this lecture, I would like to invite you to follow me on this voyage through books, readers, libraries, and in unconventional spaces of reading and for reading. As you have heard from the introduction, my focus is on primarily Europe. I really specifically chose Europe, in spite of the fact that I'm Italian, working in the Low Countries, because I strongly believe that spatial approaches can really help us to, in order to conduct pan-European research, which goes beyond the mere comparative approach and contributes to the refinement of research methodologies, allowing for a transnational dimension, painted view of all the virtue, in which no one else should enter besides the celestial groom, and every other love should be banned. And we see also on the screen, she should well build a loggia with many windows, for which may shine the brilliance of that room, and in which should live together all the affection that not be driven out, but that brilliance. But of course, too much light and fresh air could also distract Bartolomea from a meditational exercise, and the spiritual advisor stresses that should not sit too long on the loggia, and inhabit the room, the bedchamber, with a room night and day. This spatial meditation should not have been too problematic for Bartolomea, who was probably very familiar with bedchambers with loggia, like the one, just to show an example, painted by Lorenzo Lotto in his Recanati Annunciation. Please note the detail of the books on the shelf next to the bed. I would like to add a very short remark. I mean, it was not a mere chance that I chose an annunciation to present actually this idea of the bedchamber. Because at least for the 13th century onwards, the Virgin Mary at the moment of the Annunciation is always depicted immersed in reading in the Annunciation scene. Everywhere you go. That's really a pan-European aspect for the 13th century on. Very often in their bedchamber or in the kitchen. So thus creating a particularly widely spread model of the reading mother. And I mentioned also here a very recent book by Laura Miles on the Virgin Mary Book of Lamentation, Reading, Interpretation and Devotion midway with England, which is indeed focused on England, and gives a very, very good explanation of this very strong connection between the Virgin Mary, the birth and mother, and the leadership. So I refer to her for further discussion of this topic. And Bartolomea was indeed the prototype of the reading mother, performing activities in her domestic space. Bartolomea was left alone in Florence with 4 children to care for after the exile of her husband, Antonio di Alberti, in 1401, and she accepted guidance and support, spiritual and worldly matters by Domenici, who wrote a number of treatises for her, I think 5 or 6, exchange letters with her, very much focused on how she should organize a religious life, and one of the main topics is also how she should, let's say, incorporate reading activities in her daily life and also in the education of her children. And we know that Bartolomea engaged in reading activities and probably also organized reading sessions in her domestic space, where reading techniques were discussed and texts were likely exchanged. And we know that because 16 letters written by Bartolomea Alberti are preserved, and I've been so fortunate to read this letter, to find and to read these letters, and it's a very lengthy quotation on the screen, so I give you just a couple of seconds. Just look, for example, at the parts in bold. One of the letters is completely dedicated to reading and reading activity. So we know, as you see, that she's writing this letter to this anonymous correspondent. I still don't know, maybe I hope to be able to find out she's corresponding with someone, another female, and she says, after you left, going over in my memory our conversation about reading, I seem to comprehend that which, and that she explained very much. So probably they were coming together, they were reading together, and they were also discussing the usefulness of reading. So she also goes into this specific topic, what is, and what you see on the screen, what is useful reading and what actually helps them, to the mind to collect itself, drawing away from useless things, suspended among those that are useful. So how can we transform this reading activity into something useful, and usefulness in their language and in their letter is, of course, to raise up in the presence of divine majesty with self-awareness and burning with desire from him. So that she collects ideas and she shares her, let's say, conclusions with his female partner during the religious performance. So I would like to go a little bit into her description of reading. And according to Bartolomea, during the performance of religious reading activities, and she also says very specifically that we are reading the Old and the New Testament, so we know for sure that it's religious reading. So during these religious reading activities, she said the mind engages in 3 different possible actions while focusing on the written text. And this is actually her terminology. It can suspend, also mentioned in the previous quote. So she had about these suspended among the most useful. So it's the same Bartolomea reflecting on that. So it can suspend, it can badare, I translate it as concentrate, or exultare, rejoice. The act of suspending implies that when the reader finds a word that raises up the mind, she is supposed to stop the reading process and stand still in silence in order not to be distracted. Pausing from reading will unleash the salvific power of words, transforming the written words into cure for purging vice. I'm quoting, it's not my prose, this is Bartolomea's prose. Indeed, raising the mind to him who has the power to heal it is the only possible remedy for the infirm soul. The impact of this reading technique, focusing on one single word of expression, says Bartolomea, is very much preferable to concentrating and rejoicing. So the best you can do is practice this suspend technique, stopping the reading process. By concentrating, indeed, by concentrating, the reader is not specifically directing or attention to one specific point, but attentively skimming through the text, while the act of rejoicing finds its origin in retrieving many useful things while reading and letting you so experience the delight of the discovery. In any case, it is imperative that the emphasis lies on compunction rather than self-congratulation in order to avoid better reputation and vanity. End quote. So reading is described as a way to embark on a mystical itinerary and to reach a state of union with the divine. So this is actually not very different from what we read, but I think it's special here is that this lady is writing these letters, and they have this very specific conversation, 14th century, 15th century Florence, this conversation about reading, that reading becomes a central issue of discussion in, say, a domestic, a lay domestic. Although it is important to stress that activities of Bartolomea should not be reduced to a mere imitation or instruction she has received from a spiritual advisor. So to me it was very important to say, is this, let's say, Bartolomea speaking, or she's translating or retranslating or reworking what she has learned from Domenici, because in my view, at this moment, if I look at the language, this is actually different from what, not completely different, it's really her experience. And also the fact that she has written 6 letters allows me to think that she's really, as an individual, as Bartolomea herself, performing these activities. But at the moment, I'm still studying the letters in order to retrieve the specific contents of religious instruction, but also to reconstruct the network in which she was functioning. With whom was she exchanging these letters? 16, as I said, it's quite a high number, but the addresses are all anonymous. I cannot say much more about that. But despite the fact that I don't know exactly where this information comes from, I think it's also important to focus that this connection, the relationship with Domenici could have been important for growing this reflection on religious leadership, because we do have several examples of a systematic process of spiritual education of the laity performed by regular clergy, and in particular by members of the mendicant orders. And this spiritual education focused on reading has left many textual traces in forms of sermons, lectures, of treatises. Actually, is religious reading a very much discussed topic in the 15th century, in all kinds of sources, and that's why for me it was important to try to say, where does it come from? And where can I find traces of this reflection of reading? So, while arbitrarily written for a specific public and delivered to a particular addressee, this material, so all the sermons, lectures, and treatises, was widely and rapidly disseminated in manuscripts and prints, reaching a very wide and diverse public, and extending its impact and influence well beyond the limited reach of the intended first recipients. Cases in point of this practice I would like to share with you are 2 treatises by the Franciscan preacher Corbellini da Spoleto, author of this Regola della vita spirituale, Rule of Spiritual Life, and Regola della vita matrimoniale, Rule for Marital Life. Both dedicated to the Florentine layman Jacopo Bongianni. The 2 treatises were written in the second half of the 15th century, probably before the 1st of July 1464, according to a date mentioned in a manuscript of the Regola Spirituale. And enjoyed a significant dissemination in prints. At least 41 prints of the Regola della Vita Spirituale between 1477 and 1583, in most cases followed by the Regola della Vita Matrimoniale. So it was a real bestseller in late medieval and early modern Italy. Although the treatises by Corbellini have been described as lacking spiritual refinement, the capillary distribution of these treatises is a testimony to the impact and success of his teachings in late medieval and early modern Italy, and to the relevance of his instructions for the reconstruction of the role of reading in the formation of a religious reading habitus for lay readers. So this of me is very interesting. Very often these texts of Jewish dissemination are scarcely ever really valued by historians of religion because they're very plain, very generic. But seeing the impact, the normal distribution, I would say, well, let's focus on that because that's what actually Italian readers at that moment had possibly had in their household. So the impact would be much higher despite the fact of not being particularly innovative, I have to say. So, what does Cherubino say? In the Regola della Vita Spirituale, Cherubino invites his dedicatee to read his book often and repeatedly to ignite a process of religious development. And you see there an extract from the book, the pleasure to read often, to arrange your life as the book changes it. And then and also find these 7 rules useful for everyone who wishes to live a spiritual life: reasoning, affection, speaking, action, conversation, prayer, purification. So they're an interesting combination of ethical and more religious virtues. And next to that, also reading a slow pace and meditate, which is not very different from what actually our friend Bartolomeo was writing. In short chapters, Cherubino illustrates how the reader should undergo a process of transformation to purge himself from the vanity of the world and clear his mind to prepare for the performance of religious activities. He expresses the importance of having a good spiritual father and building a relationship based on mutual trust, discuss success and failures, following rules and advice, and trying to resist temptation and vicious appetites.